I love the idea of a problem opportunity, I think is how it's phrased. And I love that because it's just a great way to look at challenges.
Our featured speaker today is an experienced teacher and the head of drama at Tenenbaum Community Hebrew Academy of Toronto, who is passionately committed to high-quality arts education. Lori, it's a great pleasure to have you as our featured guest today. Thank you so much for coming on and being willing to share your journey with us.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I was wondering if you might... you can kind of take this where you want to go, but I was wondering if you might start us with some of your early experience growing up and maybe share if there were some early life events or people that came into your life that you feel really had influence in the direction that you took.
Sure, happy to. So growing up, my mom was a teacher and also an amateur actress. So I think that really did shape me. I saw her, working so hard. She was getting a degree while, there were 4 kids running around the house. And at the same time, as an outlet, she would go and be a part of this theater, very thriving theater community in Montreal. It was an amateur theater company, but they were very, very serious about what they were doing. And so I would see her, involved in the arts. And I think that really did shape me, and also music. She played the piano, she played the accordion. My dad played the guitar. So we always would laugh. We were a little bit like, the Partridge Family. That's a bit of a dated reference, but we would, we would be around the piano, we would be singing. And there was a lot of music in my house. And so I think that shaped me very much. And I think it also shaped me in terms of understanding the importance of having outlets, creative outlets. So I always did have that growing up. And so just in terms of, arts education, also, she taught at a number of different schools, and I would it was the Pied Piper. I would kind of follow her. I would follow her along wherever she would go, I would go. So I had the experience of being at different schools as well and seeing different schools and different learning experiences. I also had to adapt. So that was something that I learned also quite young. Unfortunately, my mom also passed away when I was quite young. So that was something as well that, really had to learn to deal with, to navigate challenge when I was very young. But I think that the importance of education stayed with all of us in our family. And I also grew up with a brother with special needs. So I'm sure you can imagine what our household was like. It was, very, very warm and very loving, but very, very chaotic. So my parents were trying to juggle everything. And for me as the youngest, I was just kind of watching it all and seeing what was going on around me. But I think that I have I think it's a twofold thing. I think I have an appreciation of the importance of arts education, and how important it is. And, cognitively, I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I won't dare get into, science, but I will say that I know that, the little that I know cognitively, it's very important for the brain. So that is something that I really can appreciate. I also developed, the real gift that my brother gave me was that I have very much an appreciation of people with, who are not neurotypical, we're all diverse, of course, and I have an older sister who as well specializes. She teaches teachers at McGill University, and her focus specifically as, teaching, individualized teaching and exceptionalities. But the truth is we have a Center for Differentiated Learning at my school, which I think is excellent, but she has said to me that really we all need differentiated education. So maybe perhaps that's a misnomer, but I think it's an excellent center. And I'm in awe of the staff that work there and work so hard to give every student at our school what they need. So that is a long and rambling answer, but I hope that gives you a sense of where I'm coming from. And interestingly, I really could get into this later, but I kind of went into education kicking and screaming. So it wasn't really my first choice. So interestingly, I always see it a little bit as an outsider too. And I have a lot of other streams of interest along with education.
That's excellent. I think it is one of the tragedies of our time that there's so much less importance put on creative, expression and creative output, and having, as you said, those creative outlets. Then I think there should be. I think there should be a lot more importance put on it. I'd love to hear a bit more about what you said about getting into education, kicking and screaming, and how your view on it has changed over the years.
Sure. Yeah. So, I was right out of school. I studied film production. And I really, really wanted to make movies. That was my main focus. And I was working in a little production company in a part of town that was not a fancy part of town. And my dad was a bit horrified. He was like, "What's going on?" I really, I was working on the administrative side of things. And he really, he said to me at one point, and I can very much understand. I mean, first of all, he joked that he worked so hard, the immigrant story. He worked so hard to get out of these neighborhoods. Why are you going back? But it happens in every town that these neighborhoods become gentrified eventually, right? And then kids and teens want to go back and hang out there. It's like the trendy neighborhood. But I was working in a neighborhood that, was not one of these gentrified neighborhoods. And he sort of said to me, "Well, why don't you get a degree in education?" Just the old fall back on, right? Because I think, again, coming from his generation, which is, World War and post-World War, I think he really was worried about his kids being able to, make a living. And I can very much understand that. So he really kind of nudged me in that direction. So I, decided, okay, I applied to a few places and I got into University of Toronto. And again, I was thinking, no, I'm going to go to McGill. I'm going to go to, and he was like, "Why don't you?" and nudging me. And so, anyone who knows me in like the first years of whether it was studying education or it was my job, early days, I have a good friend who started at my workplace with me. And I was very much, I'm just doing this temporarily, I always joke that this is my waitering, some actors wait tables. So I'm teaching on the side. That's what I'm doing. So, but I always continued to write and I always continued to make films and make videos. So luckily I haven't lost that. But I really, sort of sounds weird because I've been doing it for a long time, but I feel like I sort of approach teaching a little bit differently. It's sort of, I kind of joke that the focus is on the arts and the teaching comes second, but really as time has gone by, that's kind of changed. But what hasn't gotten lost is, the importance. I see so much. I also teach social science, and in social science, I teach a lot about transferable skills. And, I think that they are getting lost. I can see that, I think it started during the pandemic and post-pandemic. Unfortunately, students understandably lost part of the ability to connect with one another. As I talk about this all the time in the social science courses, that technology is going to be doing more things and we can work with it hand in hand, which is wonderful. But what the strength that we have are our interpersonal skills, our cognitive flexibility, our leadership skills. And I think that problem solving, all of those skills. And I think that we need those even more in order to be effective. I mean, I know they're calling it the fourth industrial revolution now with technology. And I think that unfortunately, after COVID, I mean, one example I always give, and it's not the student's fault, but I will say, and my sister, who's a professor, says the same thing, that sometimes if we say to students, okay, we've divided you into groups, and now, here's some work that we'd like you to do, they will sit separately on a Google Doc. And I will always say to them, I want you to look at each other in the eye. I want you to talk to each other. You can get it in other disciplines, of course, but, in the arts, whether you're playing music together, whether you are performing together, you have to coordinate. You have to problem solve. You have to talk to each other. You have to understand the way each person learns. I always, it's not perfect in every group that I teach, but I always say that to them. You have to make decisions by consensus. And I think that unfortunately that got lost over the pandemic. And I think that it's coming back. But a great way for it to come back is through the arts.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for, kind of taking us through to a little bit of what, the pandemic was like for you and what you saw about that social shift. I think we all experienced that on a different level, but I really did worry most about kids and about the impact that was having on education. And you're kind of leading me into a question I wanted to ask you about sort of the evolution of education. So, as such an experienced educator, what are the biggest evolutions you feel like you've seen, not just in teaching, but like in how students learn? Like, do you feel that, I mean, not pandemic aside, but I feel like that's one of the environmental factors. Do you feel like current day students learn differently than those maybe of just 5 or 10 years ago due to the evolution of like environmental or other lifestyle factors? And what do you think some of those differences are?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I have seen a huge evolution. And, I teach at a school where students 11 subjects. So they learn, they're going into one class and they're learning a language, and then they're going into another class and, it's chemistry. And then, so, I have great respect for them because it's a tough day. They have to keep switching gears. And so I think that for us, we had quadmesters and then we had semesters, and now we're back to no semesters. So they have 11 courses all year long, and it is very challenging. I think it's good for them in many regards in that, it's very, very, the bar is high. It's rigorous for sure. But one thing that I think, I'm reading a really interesting book called Stolen Focus. And I think it is very, very true and very relevant to right now, because one of my biggest worries, people were talking about ChatGPT, and that's a whole other topic that I'm happy to talk about. But I think the bigger concern is focus. And it is my worry. I don't think it's only students. I think, we all know that our eyeballs are monetized now, and clicks and likes and, all of that. And there's so many good things about that. The way in which we can build communities and for social activism and social causes, I think it's excellent. But I do worry that attention, the ability to sustain attention, the ability to think critically. And I teach a history course. And what I did with the students for their independent study assignment was they had to read a book. And I was saying, scrolling and reading is great, but there's still great value in reading an actual book, in my opinion, because again, your brain works differently when you're reading. You have to slow down. You have to interact with the text. You have to meet it halfway. You have to go deeper. And so we would actually sit in the library, sort of like what elementary students do, reading time. But I did that because I really wanted them to slow down. And I do worry that the ability to slow down and to interact with text and to think critically, deep thinking, I do worry. And I do think that when we multitask, we're not really multitasking. We're sort of, in my humble opinion, we're doing everything when we're doing 5 things, I think everything is being done in a mediocre fashion, So
Absolutely.
I really do. And I think, so I start every class and, my students use their phones all the time. They just did, I was telling Spencer beforehand that they just did radio plays and they were using their phones to find sound effects and do all kinds of cool things with their phones. So technology is incredible, but I do think that I do worry about how it is impacting students' brains, the constant, scrolling and clicking. And I just see, I'm looking over their shoulder and I'm seeing how quickly they're clicking from one thing to the next. And there's probably some good about that, but there are, I think, some deficits, unfortunately. So that's one thing that I think is very much has changed. Is and it's not that it's completely eroded, but I think it's something that I think it's something that we really have to work on and continue to build in students.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the aspect of continually scrolling and when you see something you don't like, you can immediately dismiss it, makes it hard for people to get comfortable sitting in things that are uncomfortable. Like
Yes.
there's lots of things in the arts that are beautiful, but they are, emotionally to some degree stressing or uncomfortable or difficult. And I've heard about like books that were important to literature being banned because, they're not nice topics to talk about. But it's so important for us to be able to deal with being a part of like understanding and sitting in those uncomfortable topics. At least I think. I'd love to understand from your perspective, assuming there's like, as you say, technology is great in some ways, but it can't actually be the solution for so many problems in the world. What do you think is the reality of this scenario where we have to sit in or have to learn to sit into these uncomfortable situations? And do you think there are exercises or strategies that people can employ to improve this aspect in themselves?
Yes, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I think that you're 100% right. I think that we are so uncomfortable sitting in these spaces these days. And we don't want to be awkward. We're not comfortable with any awkwardness. So I always say in my class, and it's like a funny thing in a classroom, but in a drama classroom, when one group is setting up for production and the other students are waiting and they, when they whip out their phones invariably that are in their boots, under their arms, in their ears, they're everywhere. Say, put them away and, it goes into their ear. And you say, put it away, they probably have 2 or 3 more, The other day, a student had 2 on her desk and I said, oh my God, they're multiplying. There's going to be 4, then there's going to be 6. But I agree. I think that we are not comfortable with awkwardness. And we're not comfortable, without getting into specifics, but we're not comfortable with cognitive dissonance. We're not comfortable holding 2 thoughts. And I think we have to. I think we're living in a world that's more and more polarized and people are not listening to each other. Everybody is in their own echo chamber. And that worries me a great deal. It actually keeps me up at night. It's the main thing these days on my mind. And I think that, I'm trying to talk to students. I'm doing a unit currently on journalism. And of course, I sneak in media and communications wherever I can. And what I'm trying to really reinforce in them is the importance of varied opinions, the importance of getting your information from as many sources as possible. And it takes time, of course. My dad, I really admire him for this because he would watch, and he still does, I think, watch, 5 or 6 different news sources and read 5 or 6 different news sources. And we know that every news source has a bias. I mean, they're all coming from a certain position. So read as much as you can. And, students are getting a lot of their information from TikTok or, other social media sources. And And it's good in a way because they are informed. I find that they're very informed. And sometimes when I tell them something, they're looking it up to see if I'm accurate. And I think that's great. I think critical thinking is wonderful. And a student will say, actually, it was May 7th, 1945, not May, they'll check my, VE day and they'll say, no. And I'll say, oh, yeah, you're right. Dates are. So I think the critical thinking, I don't want to only focus on negative because I think their critical thinking is fantastic. And the fact that they're questioning adults is fantastic. I think they should always do that. And I always tell them, I'm not teaching you. My job is not to teach you what to think. Ever. My job is to encourage you to think and to think critically. And very sadly, some very extreme political leaders started as teachers, right? Because you have a lot of power as a teacher, right? You can mold and shape. And I always say that is not my job. My job is not to tell you what to think. And you are allowed to have diverse opinions. And we actually had a workshop. We had a speaker come in on a professional development day to talk about how do you navigate difficult discussions? How do you let students be heard? But if they're saying something that really is bordering towards, because they don't always know, that might be bordering towards hate speech or bordering towards offensive, how to sort of navigate them and make them realize this is happening without making them feel unheard, So I hope I'm answering your question, but I think that's part of it. I think that we cannot lose that. And I think in this new generation, I think unfortunately, we've lost some people already. Unfortunately, some people are very, very stuck in their echo chamber, and I don't know how to get them out. I'm not sure what the answer is. But I think that for younger generations, we have to encourage them not to get stuck in that, one opinion, that there's a huge world out there. There are so many people who live differently, who think differently. And, you have to try to respect that.
Hello, all. I hope you're enjoying this episode. I want to ask you, our listeners, if you could give us a review in your podcasting platform of choice. We don't have sponsors and we don't run ads, but we are looking to grow. So if you feel we bring value to your listening experience, please drop us a review when you get a chance. Thanks so much. It's so true. And I really appreciate how you see your role as a teacher too. That you're saying it's not my job to tell you what to think. It's really my job to give you, this lens to kind of examine the world through and to show you how to be curious and how to test things for yourself. And I definitely agree with you that, having a lot of different sources of information that don't necessarily feel intuitive to you can be a good thing, but navigating them is where I get worried now. And I am really glad that there are teachers like you. Someone actually commented on the questions and discussion channel who is a language teacher themselves, and said that they would be delighted to take your class because the world needs more passionate teachers. I was wondering, with all the experience that you've had, what prompted your interest in attending the MIT Bootcamp program? Like, why that program? And then have you found any of the tools from the Disciplined Entrepreneurship Framework useful for you?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the kind words. I really, from everyone, I really, really appreciate that. That's really, really lovely. And, I think part of what was happening in terms of me choosing to apply to the Innovation Leadership Bootcamp was that, like many people during the pandemic, I wanted to make sure that I was continuing to learn and continuing to challenge myself. And I have, I don't have an entrepreneurship or a business background, but I have always been interested. I did start a production company for, 2 years ago, I think it was. I decided to apply to a fringe festival. It's a theater festival. They have them all around the world, and you can write scripts and apply, and it's a lottery, which is really cool because it levels the playing field. And I thought, I always encourage my students. I will as I said, well, I'll say, put your phones away and I want you guys to talk to each other, or go out in the school. You have 15 minutes and find this or find that, take risks, try things. Very much experiential learning and inquiry-based learning. And I thought to myself, okay, I have to, I tell them to do this. I have to do it myself. I have to challenge myself. So I came upon this. So I started a production company. I needed to, in order to apply to this festival. And I actually got in, which was incredible. So so now I'm thinking, okay, how can I use this company? Because, I'd like to do things. It's quite brand new, but I'd like to do things that are theater-based, but I'd also like to incorporate, perhaps, educational and arts ventures. And so I thought, okay, I'll learn a little bit about how to build a business. So I just thought, okay, I saw this online and I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. I'll apply. And I also was thinking that, another topic that fascinates me is, how do you get education to people in the world who don't have access to it? So I remember that when I was being interviewed and I was being asked, what is one area that you'd like to explore? That was something that I mentioned. There's places in the world where girls are not allowed to be educated. There's so many places where education is limited. And so that's something that I'd like to explore too. And I haven't begun a particular startup, but I am interested in that area. So I'm definitely putting it out there that if there's anyone who's interested in, educational technology and startups in that area. But I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. And I have to say that, it was so eye-opening to talk to people in the cohort that I was in. I was the only person who wasn't either an engineer or, a data scientist. And it was so wonderful for me to learn the way other people learn who are in a different discipline. And in terms of the professors, I was scribbling. I was constantly scribbling like a madwoman because, it was difficult for me. This was not something I knew anything about, and I had to keep up. So it was really good for my brain, I think. And I've definitely used it. I always say with this, it was life-changing. It was really a life-changing experience, and it has stayed with me. And I think about it a lot in all of the things that I do, both education and other things. And part of it is I love the idea of a problem opportunity, I think is how it's phrased. And I love that because it's just a great way to look at, challenges. And that's a huge one. And, they talk about, I think, entrepreneurship and is it intrapreneurship, where you are innovating in the place where you currently are. And so I try to bring that problem solution, mindset to my teaching. And I always tell students, in the arts, everything is problem solving. So, you're going to do a show and, 3 of the mics don't work and, your show is up in 3 hours, right? Or, there's always things, one of your leads is sick or, so you have to transpose the melodies because they can't sing at the key that, in the key they were singing in. I also have a background in improv, right? And improvisational comedy is great for that, right? Like, yes, and you say yes to things and you move forward. So I think that's one of the huge things that I took away from the boot camp, is that, is that thinking that, how can I turn this into an opportunity? And how can I have a positive mindset? It was also so refreshing, coming back to the thing about people being in their own world, that it just was so positive. People from all over the world trying to make a difference, whether it's in their small communities. I love that. I absolutely love that. I think that just puts me in such a positive frame of mind whenever I go back and catch up with other people in the boot camp and what they're doing. So I think those are some of the things that I took away with me from my experience.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier about translational skills where you can use them from you get the skills in one area and then you can use them elsewhere. Now, at my employer, Shark Ninja, when an engineer goes from being a normal level engineer to being a senior engineer, they're always signed on to a course in presence, in how to sort of convey themselves. And I admit, when I first read about it, I was like, oh, I don't know if this is going to be very useful for me. But I went through it, and I have to say, I think every single engineer should go through it, because it's about how I think it was like the 3 circles where you're like, first circle where you're less, more quiet, more listening to others, getting perspectives in. The middle circle where you're sort of communicating and getting perspectives from people, but you're also taking a place on the stage. And then the third circle where you're sort of leading the discussion and pushing forward on perspective. And I thought it was so well done and so well thought out that I'm absolutely flabbergasted with how useful that is as an engineer, which isn't where at all the skill was sort of designed to apply. I'd love to get your perspective on these sorts of things, where skills from acting and drama and education actually, like, obviously those skills are very useful there and they're very important areas, but how you think they can apply elsewhere to other people.
Yay, give me the opportunity to speak about this. I love it. Yeah, I mean, we always try to promote our program. And one of the things that we say, we do have students, as you said, who will be in the arts and who will be actors, producers, or, they're working behind the scenes or media or broadcast journalism. But as you said, it's so important and so relevant to all professions. And so we talk about that all the time. And, I always say that when I'm talking about careers and teaching careers, I always say that, they say soft skills and hard skills, but I prefer the term transferable skills, because these are the ones that you need in all careers, right? That aren't career specific. And I very much, when you were talking about the circles, it reminded me of Stanislavski, this very famous acting teacher that most people who study, performing arts, they learn some of his theories. But yeah, there's the personal circle, and then there's the wider circle. And it's been adapted, I guess, to public speaking and interacting with others. And one of the things that is so transferable is, when you're working in the arts, you're working in a team, and you have deadlines. You also have a fair bit of creativity. So all of those things, when deciding what they want to make art about, they have to listen to each other. It's decision-making by consensus. Everyone needs to be heard. Not everyone's ideas are going to be taken, potentially, but everybody needs to be heard. And you need to iterate, right? As we talked about in the program as well. You need, you start broad, and then you narrow it down, and you come up with your idea, and then you're creating, you're building it, you're shaping it. And all along the way, you have to kind of balance two things. I say this to students all the time. You have to balance creativity with the realities of the world, which is that there are deadlines, and they're going to be expecting a product within a certain time. And, sometimes people think, oh, the art's very airy-fairy. And I would say, no. So, not like that at all. You have very, very specific parameters. And I always talk about the fact that there is creativity in engineering. There's creativity in science. I mean, how do people come up with vaccines, right? They have to shed away everything that, it's like a Venn diagram, right? But also they have to shed away everything that didn't, that's not relevant from the previous vaccines, but they have to figure out what's the overlap, and, and they have to think creatively, and they have to, so there's creativity in every field. But I think that, there's also a huge crossover between science and math and music, right? So there's a lot of students who, in the music program, I just went to their year end show. And, a lot of the students who were in their bands were also love science and love math and love But at the end of the day, you can't work effectively. I really believe you cannot work effectively unless you learn how to how to be a leader, how to lead by being the leader, how to be the worker bee who's leading by example and just getting things started and saying, hey guys, let's get going. And that applies for a high school project, but it also applies for a master's thesis, and it also applies, in the work world. Excuse me. So I think that's how I just believe so strongly that these transferable skills are so, so, so important. And you get a lot of them in the arts.
I mean, I'm definitely biased, but I very much agree with you. I was a kid that scholastically was not very focused. I think it's bad to say you're good or bad at school, but I was definitely not focused on curriculum, but I was very engaged with the arts. And I feel like everything I learned creatively and about curiosity and about problem solving, as you indicated, has greatly helped me later on when I learned to become a better student. It's, really amazing listening to your journey. I know that it probably wasn't all roses and sunshine. And I was wondering if there's any particular point that comes to your mind where you felt like you had to make a major pivot or you deviated from the plan, and how do you go about deciding what to do, and how do you look at it now retroactively? What did it teach you?
For sure. So, I mean, one thing for sure, like a lot of educators, when we had to start teaching remotely, we had one quick, the school had no choice. We had to, as you said, we had to pivot so quickly. So we had one quick workshop on how to use Zoom. It was like they had to teach every teacher at our school in one day. So it was like a conveyor belt. We had to just go in and learn, and it was, I remember being so overwhelmed. And, first learning to use the program, and the creators also pivoted and added new features as they saw what teachers needed. And it was a fascinating time in that sense, because we had such a our head of educational technology was literally conversing with the creators of this program and saying, well, you have to find a way to let people in gradually, because literally teachers were crying. They were saying, people are coming into my class. I don't know who they are. And they're not my students, and I don't know how to navigate that. And so literally I saw the program shifting to meet educators' needs. And I thought that was fascinating. But it was so overwhelming. And then figuring out, how are you going to teach? I mean, how am I going to teach drama online? And there was a time, believe it or not, where we had half students in the room and half online, and they would alternate. So we had a cohort A and B. So A was in the room, B was at home, and then B was in the room, A was at home. You're trying to do activities where half are online, half are in the room, and you're doing a warm up and there's a delay. I did production. One student was across the world. There were students in one country and students in the classroom, and they were literally saying lines together. I mean, there were times where I had to be at home because I was sick and I had to isolate. And, so the kids saw my huge head on the screen, and they were in the room and I was away. So, so many computations and, permutations. And it was just such a dizzying time. And I think I just sort of said to myself, okay, after I cried to my principal once, I said, okay, I'm going to try to use this as an opportunity to learn. We have a learning platform, and there were constantly new programs that were being put online for us to try. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try these ed tech programs. I'm going to try to learn them. I'm going to use, I don't have to use every single one, but I'm going to try to use them and learn them and see how I can make things as meaningful as possible for students. And so, that was hugely, and everybody was in the same boat, no matter what profession you were in. And I think all teachers were in the same boat, where you just had to figure things out. And it shook us up. And, we had a professional development day where we said, okay, what things from this pandemic time would we keep? which ones do you not want to keep, but which ones would you like to keep? And I mean, there are pluses. The fact that we can invite speakers into our classroom from anywhere in the world is pretty cool, right? They don't have to come in physically. So there are things that we've taken away from it that I think are great. But of course, it was very challenging at the beginning. And then I think for me now, I'm actually, it's funny that you asked about this now, because I'm actually sort of thinking about next steps. Because I think I would like, and I think without realizing it, that might have been, sometimes you do things and it's more sort of visceral. It's like your limbic system. You're not really, you don't know why yet, right? And I think part of it is, I think I'm sort of wanting to take some next steps. And to be honest, I don't know what they are yet. But I think I would like, not necessarily to stop teaching, but I think I would like to add other things into the mix, you know? So hopefully, having done the boot camp has taught me that the combination of having done the boot camp and also having to, shift and pivot and change the way we all taught, hopefully that stayed with me. And I will continue to not be afraid of challenges, and to try new things.
Absolutely. That's excellent. I'm really excited to hear about as you know more about what the next things will be, the next steps. Very excited to hear about that.
Thank you.
Now, one of our listeners, Carlos, has got a question of his own.
Well, Lottie, let me tell you, thank you so much for sharing your experience. It's been extremely inspiring for me because I also teach English as a second language in Venezuela. By the way, I am in Venezuela. So I've got a question, and it is, what do you think about mistakes in terms of the learning process and teaching experience, Because I tell my students that mistakes are fully allowed and we all can make them. The red flag will show up if we make the same mistake over 3 times, Otherwise, that's totally fine. But I know that there are some teachers that hate mistakes. So I'm just wondering, what do you think about it? Thank you.
It's so nice to meet you, Carlos, and so cool to hear from another teacher. And yeah, thank you for being here, and thank you for asking this question. I think it's so important. I know that in drama classes, there are a lot of students at my school who we have a very vigorous and rigorous program, and they worry. We have a lot of very hard workers. We have a lot of perfectionists, and they are so worried about making mistakes. And it's also when you're an adolescent, right? It's like the worst thing in the world to be embarrassed. And so they are afraid to take creative risks. But I always tell them that that's where the growth happens. I give the example that I was on holiday and some friends were going ziplining and I was terrified, but I did it. And, and I felt so proud of myself afterwards. So, I mean, not to the point where, when there are students who are afraid to do presentations, I'll always ask them. I have another sister who's a social worker, so I'm very lucky. I have really wise sisters who have guided me, and she, she does that CBT with people who are anxious and nervous, and she always tells me to ask, okay, what's the level? If a student says I'm nervous to present or I'm worried about making a mistake, if the level is a 9 or 10, maybe you're not ready yet to present, or but if it's a 2 or 3, maybe challenge yourself, and I think in drama class is a place where, we're playing games and we're doing silly and fun things. And I always say, we're doing an improv game and it's alphabet improv, and you have to say a sentence with the next letter, and a student can't think of it. Somebody else will give you a letter. It's okay. Someone will jump in and they'll give you a sentence or they'll give you a letter. So it's okay. Don't be worried. We're here to have fun. And I think it's a great place. Of course, there's places where if you make a mistake, it counts hugely. So of course, that's part of, if they're going to go into a field where mistakes are very costly, of course, that's something to keep in mind. But in the classroom, that's the laboratory, right? That's the place to try things. And I think, I think mistakes are, I think it's really important to let students know that mistakes are necessary. You can't learn without them. If you're reading phonetically and you're sounding letters out for, for smaller kids or for language learning, if you're, if you're learning to read phonetically, you have to make mistakes, right? Or if you're learning a second language, you have to. And I know you said you teach language learners. I know that I've always been told when I was learning another language, French, for example, I'd be afraid to speak. And people would say, no, you have to speak. If you don't speak, you won't. And so, of course, you use the wrong word and, it's fine. But I think it's very, very important because I do think that there's a lot of anxiety these days. I think young people are feeling very anxious for many reasons. And I think one of the reasons is they feel that they have to get everything right. Yeah. So, yes, I am a huge, huge believer, in trying things, experimenting.
Great answer. Yeah. I was going to say, did that answer your question, Carlos? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. It sure does. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And
thank you so much for that great question, too. I think, you make such a good point, too, that those lessons, going back to what Spencer was saying, too, about us being not as comfortable maybe now, like seeing things that make us uncomfortable, like getting more comfortable with mistakes and moving forward, I think is such a key part of learning and such a skill that we need for the rest of life. I know that we're close to the end of the hour, but if it's okay with you, we've got one more question for you. Do you have a couple more minutes?
Sure, of course.
We're wondering if what words of wisdom you might want to leave us with today. And you can make this as big or little of a question as you want. It could be a quote that someone shared with you, or a motto that you live by, or just something that you're liking this week.
Wow. Oh, okay. Well, I don't know how wise I am, but there is one thing that really stayed with me in terms of teaching. And it was one of our first sort of special education teachers at our school. And she said something that really stuck with me. And she sort of said that, accommodation is not giving every student the same thing, but it's giving every student what they need. And it's tricky as an educator to figure out what each student needs because, one of them might need really tough love. So they'll ask for an extension and you'll say, nope, get it done. And you say it because you know them, you say it with love because you know them and you know that this is what they need. Whereas there's someone else and you know that they're going through a lot right now and they really need that time. So you say, sure, when do you need? What will work for you? So that really stayed with me. And I think, it can apply to life as well, that there's times that we need to be really tough on ourselves too. You're on a deadline and you don't go easy on yourself and you say, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get it done. But then there's other times where you need to be kind to yourself too and, give yourself what you need, whether it's taking care of yourself or time or, so that's something that really stayed with me. And I try to keep it in mind, both when I'm teaching and outside of the classroom.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I think that resonates with me quite well as well. I think it is that importance of understanding the time when to be the tough love and when to be the, giving yourself the leniency you need. Thank you so much, Laurie. We really appreciate your thoughts and everything you've shared with us and taught us today.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you for doing what you guys do. I think this is a great, great community. And I really appreciate that you got it started.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much, Laurie.
You've just finished another episode of Founder's Voyage. the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. The team at Founders Voyage wants to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us, and if so, please share this with someone else who might enjoy this podcast. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and by donating to our Patreon. Outro music today is Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band.